Commander format is one where half the fun of deck building is incorporating your own unique sense of style or centering your card choices around a theme. However, like the rest of Magic, there are staple cards that are too good not to include, and often they don't fit the aesthetic of the rest of the deck. But with thousands of cards to choose from, there may just be some flavourful alternatives to the format's most played spells. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today we are going to be talking about Commander staples and their flavourful alternatives. We're not going to do much of a preamble today, and we're going to try as hard as we can to cut down on the waffle as well, because we have quite a bit to get through. But essentially, us being a flavour podcast, we talk a lot about how a card feels and about the kind of story and lore merits that surround a card. And oftentimes, when you're building a deck for the Commander format, a format which classically has space for you to flex your Vorthos muscles and to flex your sort of like personal style, sometimes a staple in the format is just too good not to include.
Yeah.
But there are alternatives to these cards if you want to maybe play at a slightly more casual level, or maybe if you want to just kind of prove all the haters wrong. We've got some alternatives for some Commander staples. Nath, you've cultivated this list.
I have. Good pun. Well done.
There we go, because that will be one of them. We didn't plan that, and even if we did, it's too bad for us to admit to it. So
exactly.
So we haven't done every staple in the format because we don't have 15 hours worth of video time.
Good God,
but we've just picked a few, or rather, Nathan, you've picked a few that have stood out to you, and we're going to go through some of the best alternatives to these cards. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, the way I looked at it is I looked at kind of the so what I'm going by is the fantastic source of the font of knowledge that is EGH Rec, and I've basically looked like the top 30 cards that are in decks over the last 2 years. Obviously, the database could have gone further back than this, but realistically, all the people making the glut of decks that we have being made at the moment, the past 2 years, is a pretty good frame of reference. Obviously, within that 30, there are some things like, mana rocks, like Signix, for example, that take up half of the bloody list.
Yeah.
So thankfully, it isn't 30 cards we're going to be rattling through today, but it is also interesting to see like the things that kind of the cards that people figure aren't things you can get away or get around, the kind of cards that dictate themselves to be cards that have to be in your deck, and whether or not that view can be adjusted to a little bit. Sometimes it can't, and we'll be able to talk a little bit about that as well today. So yeah, it's basically a little breakdown of the top 30 if we get there. We'll see how long we get through.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, these kinds of episodes we can do plenty of in the future, so if we don't say a card that you are interested in seeing alternatives today, we'll be doing it in a future episode, because I think this is the kind of thing we can do again and again.
Way more interesting past the top 30. We're going to see some fairly generic styles of cards in this episode, whereas if you look into, like, say, outside the top 30 into like the top 50, top 100, there are some really weird quirky cards that you can actually look at to have even strange alternatives that might be really old, or just from even sometimes like new sets, alternatives that are a little bit worse can slip under because they're not super cool and interesting, but at the same time they still serve a role and a function that might not have been picked up the first time we see it. So,
yeah, exactly. So what we're going to do for this episode as well, guys, is even though we're primarily an audio podcast, we have been experimenting with our YouTube channel. This episode will go up as a YouTube video because these kinds of things are usually best with some visuals, so you can see the card. And what I'll attempt to do as well is put a timestamp in the comments description box where you can skip to certain cards as we go through them. But for now, sit back, relax. We'll go through some flavourful alternatives to those Commander staples. Nathan, take it away.
Well, we start with we kind of already start with something that's going to screw over the whole paradigm of this, and it's the top card, unsurprisingly, is Soul Ring.
Sure, yes.
And Soul Ring is kind of a difficult one to get right because you're not really playing it for flavour in any way, shape, or form. I mean, and realistically, in terms of like functionality, there aren't really a lot of alternatives that are like, say, that have analogs. One thing that I did look at is things like instead of playing Soul Ring, things like Exploration or Burgeoning, like the kind of cards that scale really, really well with mana kind of early. But the one that I kind of thought was the only one that I found that was really good, that was really low mana, because that's the only thing I could think of in terms of like flavor. If you want that turn one play that actually gives you a bit of a kick, is Paradise Mantle.
For sure.
Yeah, Paradise Mantle is really interesting. It's a 0 mana equipment, and it has an equip cost of 1, and it gives the equipped creature the ability from Birds of Paradise, which is it can tap to add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. The reason I list this down as an early mana accelerant is because if you're playing like a 1 mana or a 2 mana commander, is it? I mean, yeah, the kind of little bit of chip damage you get in initially off of like a first hit off of Karlov or something is fine and dandy, but a Paradise Mantle can give you a little bit of a skip up, and it can kind of allow you to use your commander if it's a low commander a bit more efficiently. Like a lot of the times I use Aelia, I find that can, as much as he is a good blocker, like a 2/3 Death Touch is a pretty good blocker. It'd be nice to have some bit more utility in the early turns if you have a 2 drop and getting it out early. Apart from that, unfortunately, Sol Ring, as I said, doesn't have a lot of analogs.
Sure, but I think something like Paradise Mantle, where if you're looking to build a deck which doesn't just focus around artifacts, but is around equipment specifically, or even the artwork, if you're looking for something where all the cards have a Mirrodin feel, or all the cards have multicolor in the artwork, then this is something which you can definitely put in place of those more traditional mana rocks, because it fills a very different slot whilst also providing you mana acceleration.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, good alternative.
It's also really good with Amara, the Amara that whenever she becomes untapped, you get a 1/1. So because you get, I know that you might want to use Sol Ring because you want to get your vehicles out, and vehicles are colorless, but Paradise Mantle also gets her tapping very comfortably and very easily. So that's a auto one for me. As I say, beyond that, Sol Ring doesn't have a lot to say. There's not much flavor to it. We can ignore that and move on to something slightly more interesting. The number 2 slot is taken up by Swords to Plowshares. Interestingly enough, Path to Exile is 30th on the list, which is a big, vast difference. I do understand there is obviously a massive difference between life and mana in Commander. Like, no one really cares if you're on 40 or 50, but they do care if you're on 2 or 3 lands by turn 2 or 3. So I do understand why Path slips down a little bit lower. Saying that, just because Swords is in 1 mana really ridiculously efficient, probably the most efficient removal spell in the game, that doesn't mean there aren't some other cards that kind of do a similar kind of thing. I've looked at a couple of like reactionary spells, things like Condemn or Reciprocate. Reciprocate's a really interesting one because it is a 1 mana instant in white, exile target creature that dealt damage to you this turn. It's got flavor text from 8.5 Tails. You don't really see a lot of flavor text from him. And it was released in, I think it was the Elspeth versus Venser or something like that. It was in one of the dual decks. So there is a newer artwork for it. But the fact it doesn't say combat damage is really interesting. So if you've got, say, one of these commanders that pings you, say like Judith or something like that, then this can get it quite comfortably. And it's not a card I've actually seen in many decks whatsoever. And it's a bit of a nicer version. Like, you don't have to give life off. You're not giving any payoff to them. The only thing is you need to get hit. And if anything, that's a bit more as a retribution. I mean, the card is called Reciprocate. So it does feel a little bit more in White's color pie of, well, if you hit me, I'm going to fuck you. So to stop it.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of these spells which are instant speed removal or have some kind of caveat on them, they don't, if they're not as good as Swords to Plowshares, people kind of gloss over them. But Swords to Plowshares has such a specific flavor where you're basically getting rid of a creature because the artwork suggests it's turning to a peaceful way, or this, that, and the other. Whereas things like Condemn, if you're playing like an Angels deck, or if you're playing a commander which comes from, say, like Orzhov Color Pie, then something like Condemn fits in a lot nicer into the theme and the kind of ideology of your deck than Swords to Plowshares does. These reactionary things are punishing.
Devouring Light, similar thing. 1 white for an instant. Exile target attacking or blocking creature. Doesn't have to be attacking you, but it's got Convoke. So if you want to sit back, if you've got a load of vigilance creatures, things like that, this can essentially be free. And that's a big thing. I mean, a 3 mana does look like quite a lot, but it doesn't, as I say, it doesn't need to be attacking you. It doesn't need to be a creature that's blocking one of your creatures. As long as the creature is attacking or blocking, you can tap your creatures to make a nice free exile effect. And obviously, exile is quite important here because that's what makes Swords and Path so important, is that you could do destroy effects, and that's fine. But within the context of the game, obviously, exiling is quite important. So that's a hard thing to kind of get away from. But as I say, this Devouring Light thing as well, even your shadow is too foul to tolerate. It's a really nice artwork. It's got a beam of light coming down from Avacyn's staff at a demon's face. Feels very righteous. Another one that I really like, especially with Lurrus coming out recently, is Soul Snare. Now, Soul Snare kind of sits in the same reactionary space as Condemn and Reciprocate does. It's a 1 mana enchantment. And for 1 mana, you sacrifice it to exile target creature that's attacking you or a planeswalker you control. Now, this is similar in concept to Condemn, but the thing that makes it a bit more interesting is it sits in play, and it's almost like it wards you off. It's not like you're giving a warning going, like, if you attack me, I'm going to do this. Like with Condemn, or say, sorry, it gives you the opportunity to give a warning, to make a deal, to be a bit more political. And especially if there's a way to recur it with something like Lurrus or something like that, it does make it quite potent and make it so people don't really want to come at you as much.
Sure. What I really like about these white alternatives, which are maybe a little bit more reactionary and a bit more of a political thing than Swords to Plowshares, is sure you can use something at instant speed politically because you can just tell people you have an instant speed answer and they can back off. But if you're playing something like Arcades Sabbath, you're playing like the Walls deck, or if you're
Hmm.
playing something like Queen Marchesa, when people play her in a very sort of enchantment-y pillow fort type of way, if you can have these threats which sit on the battlefield and kind of give your opponents a big flare that you don't want to be attacked, and you can make these deals. So I think, yeah, if you're playing at something that you want to have maybe a bit more political leverage, or maybe if you're playing gods which need the devotion cost, something
Yeah,
that's maybe a bit more
exactly.
permanent is going to work out a lot better for you.
Yeah, so another one that plays in the same idea of like give and take is ablation. Now this is one that's I think is even more interesting than say like your exile effects. It's 2 and a white for a white instant. The owner of target non-land permanent shuffles it into their library, then draws 2 cards. Now I know drawing 2 cards is quite a lot to give the opponent, but the tuck ability, this idea of putting a card into someone's library, is, I mean, it might actually not be as good as exile, but there are cards that do return things from exile, whereas getting something out of your library is a bit more difficult. You know, it requires a bit more of a of a hoop to jump through. And back when you had Commander Tuck rule not in effect, this was this was obnoxious. But the fact that the other thing you can do is, because it's modal, this is why I like this card, because it's not only a spell, a reactionary spell if you need to get rid of something really desperately, and you're also giving them a bit of a payoff back, so it doesn't hurt as much. But you can also use it defensively if someone's just coming after one of your permanents, or even your commander. You can shuffle it and that bounce it back into protect it and get 2 cards out of it. So that modal effect on ablation is really good as well. The fact you can keep this white thing of going, well, I don't have to do the horrible thing. You know, like Swords to Plowshares, you're rarely going to do on your own creature unless you really need the life. Which, yeah, okay, it's a nice Tekka's ability and everything, but realistically, you want to be using your 1 mana removals on your opponent's spells.
I don't know. I've been using things like Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares and something like a feather deck.
Path is very different. Path to Exile is a whole different kettle of fish. A land and life is very different. I've pathed my own stuff a lot. Yeah, sometimes you're that desperate for a land. That's fine. But yeah, I think this is nice, the fact you get this little payoff. It's another card that's quite old. The only reason I knew of it is because it came in the Nahiri pre-con deck. The only other one I've got to say in terms of white removal spells that kind of sit in a similar vein to Swords of Plowshares is Dispatch. Now, if you're playing an artifact-heavy deck and you're in white, you should be playing this card. It's the same effect. So it's a white for tap target creature. But if you control 3 artifacts, if you have Metalcraft, it gets exiled instead. So I've got this in my Breya deck. Okay, yes, it might not always do what you need it to do. At least it can tap something down if you don't happen to have enough Metalcraft, and it can be responded to. But I do think that for flavor-wise, if you don't have the money to get a swords or whatever, like Dispatch is dirt cheap. And it fits the theme a bit nicer. I feel like if you are working hard for your 1 mana removal spells, you're already getting a discount on the cost. So working a bit hard for them seems fair.
I think that's fair as well. And I think the whole point of us doing this list as well is that none of these are going to be the most efficient compared to the most efficient staples, because that's why these things are staples. However, as we all know, being players of this format, you are sometimes so sick of seeing the same card again and again and again. And actually, you as the player, as well as you being the opponent, get a lot more enjoyment out of having effects or having cards that you don't usually see. So I can't count the amount of times that my stuff's been plowed or been Path to Exiled away. But if somebody came at me with an Oblation or a Dispatch, I think I'd be a lot more intrigued and interested in what they were doing, and it would certainly be something that I hadn't seen. I might even look at that for my own decks. I play
This is the
artifact
thing,
decks.
is the idea, yeah. The only thing you've really got is opportunity cost. For things like Soul Ring, the opportunity cost isn't that great. Yeah, you can have that one hand out of however many that you get, in your 50th game, and you go absolutely nuts and you get knocked out first, so was it worth it? But then you've also, obviously efficiency and coverage are really important for these spells, which is why they are so popular. But you can sacrifice a little bit of power to have something that suits your deck style a little bit better, and also sometimes in a niche circumstance is actually better. These aren't, nothing's strictly better in a vacuum outside of exceptionally small cases. So there's always, wiggle room, and removal is an easy one. Like, you're going to have removal. Yeah, you probably want the cheap stuff, but realistically, spending 3 mana to get rid of the most important thing on the board is just as good as having one, unless you're being really tight on your curve, which typically goes towards the more CDH side of things anyway. So, but yeah, that's all of the Swords to Plowshares alternatives I could find that seems. There are a few others, but I mean they're really like niche things that, like give your opponent 3/3s or angels and stuff, which seems a lot worse than the other options.
For sure. All right, what's up next?
Well, the next one's a bit more similar to Soul Ring. We've got Cultivate. This is third. Kodama's Reach is 9th. Farseek is 19th, and Rampant Growth is 20th. So these are all.
Why do you think that Cultivate is third, but Kodama's Reach is 9th?
Kodama's Reach was harder to get hold of, and is more expensive. Cultivate has been reprinted a few more times than Kodama's Reach. It's about twice as expensive, Kodama's Reach.
That's interesting, seeing as they literally are worth
the same
well,
card. Yeah, exactly. Obviously, the arcane side of it really does not matter with a card like that. Although there is some interesting things you can do with Zada and splicing onto arcane with a Kodama's Reach to get really tricksy.
I suppose we could do like 20 minutes alone on whether or not you pick Cultivate or Kodama's Reach.
Yeah,
for your deck.
And this is like the same thing with like Farseek or Rampant Growth. Obviously, Rampant Growth can get you a forest, whereas Farseek can't. So there is an automatic thing of, well, maybe sometimes Rampant Growth could be better. But I mean, these are like your typical 4/1s that everybody goes for. You can then move into looking at things like Explosive Vegetation and Ranger's Path, ones that get you 2 lands for 4 mana. But we're not going to look at those. We're going to look at things that are a little bit more interesting. We're going to look at some that are going to be like Beanstalk Giant for a nice new one. The reason I put this in is because modal spells are really, really powerful. And the ability in decks that like Primal Surge or all creature decks, that you don't want, if you are for some whatever reason, you are going to be super niche and you want to do your own like deck limitation. This is a creature that functions basically as a Rampant Growth, and then also has the ability to do something big in the late game. The problem with things like Cultivate, especially things like Farseek and Rampant Growth, is on turn 11, it's not the best thing in the world. Whereas Beanstalk Giant, not only is he already a 7-drop? Sorry, I should say what he does. He's a 6 and a green for an XX, and the X is power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control, and then you can, for Fertile Footsteps, 2 and a green, put him on an adventure as a sorcery to search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. Interestingly, this obviously isn't tapped either, so it is technically like a 2 mana if you use the mana that turn as well. So I think that's a nice alternative if you don't care about the second lands, because sometimes the extra land in hand isn't what you want. A Cultivate might not necessarily be ramping you as efficiently as it could.
What I really like about these adventure cards, especially things like Beanstalk Giant, and there's a Realmcloak Giant is a whiteboard wipe kind of version of this as well, is that if you're playing, say if you're doing an Eldraine themed deck, or even something like Giant Tribal, you really want these cards instead of things like Cultivate and Kodama's Reach if you're going for full flavor, and your deck will still function. This is the thing. People are kind of worried when it comes to Commander staples that if they don't put in their Cultivates, if they don't put in their Soul Rings or their Swords to Plowshares, then the deck won't function. And that is simply not true. Like, okay, it won't function up against someone who's tuning their decks to be the kind of 7 and 8s out of 10, but your decks will still play cards and play spells. And again, you'll have just as much fun, if not more fun, doing so because you're leaning into your flavor. So yeah, Beanstalk Giant is one that I must admit I haven't really looked at before because none of my decks flavorfully want it. But the day that comes that I'm playing that Giant Tribal, or that maybe that like Arthurian Legend Tribal, or like British Isles Mythology Tribal, which Eldraine kind of leaned into.
Or if you do like a Naya deck or something like that, where you need to get your colours out. Yeah, it's really nice. It's a good card.
Yeah, slam dunk. All right.
So in the similar vein, we're going to look at some cards that aren't necessarily as efficient per se, but could be much more efficient in the right deck. The first one's Far Wanderings, 2 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. If you have thresholds, so if you've got 7 or more cards in your graveyard, instead search your library for 3 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So yes, okay, the floor is that you only get 1 land for 3 mana, but if you are a graveyard deck, you don't mind waiting a little bit of time. If you have means to get a lot of cards into your graveyard early, using things like Satyr Wayfinder or Mulch or stuff like that. I've got a Merrin deck. I usually have a few cards in there by turn 3 or 4. 3 lands for 3 mana is pretty darn good.
Cool.
The next one, Primal Growth, similar idea, plays towards graveyard decks, 2 and a green for a sorcery, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield. However, it's got a kicker. If the kicker is if you sacrifice a creature as you cast it, you search your library for 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield. This isn't putting them into play tapped, so if you do happen to have a creature deck that you want to be sacrificing your creatures for effect, whether it's aristocrats or if you are playing, as I say, like a Merrin deck or something like that, then yeah, this is amazing. Not only do you get the trigger off the sacrifice creature, but the 2 lands come in and they come into play untapped as well.
Absolutely. There are kicker decks out there as well, which will
Exactly.
help people. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, there's lots of decks that can use these to greater effect than say a cultivate or a, and especially like say late game. Late game primal growth still gives you at least a trigger off a sacrifice creature, which might not be the most thing, but at least it's something slightly better than 2 lands when you really don't need them. Another one that I think is really interesting that I really don't see played that much. I have a Tasker deck, so I see it a lot because I play the Tasker deck a lot. But it's Realms Uncharted. This is 2 and a green. It's an instant. You search your library for 4 land cards with different names, reveal them, and an opponent chooses 2 of those cards. Those 2 cards are put into the graveyard, and you get the other 2. So it's basically fact or fiction, Sylvan Tutor kind of thing. So, yeah. Which is, I think, the instant speed is really important. The fact you can do it at the end step before it comes to your turn means you can make the most of the lands that you do get. If you're playing like something like Lord Windgrace or something like that, where you really want lands in your graveyard anyway, this is essentially 3 mana, go and search for 4 lands. They could, as I say, any lands. They have to be 4 different types. You can't go and get 4 islands if you're really hurting for blue for some reason. But it does allow you to get your setups for things like Thespian Stage, Dark Depths. It allows you to get a lot of different. It allows you to get any utility land you want. If you happen to be really lucky and play a Gaia's Cradle, kudos to you. You can go and get this. But I'm pretty sure that one's going into your graveyard. Also, I love this card because it's got an elf sat on overlooking a map. The artwork's by Vulcan Barger, and I really like this artwork.
Well, I was going to say, if you're playing hard elf ball, if you want to do everything is elf, this is the perfect card for you. This is the one to go for.
Yeah, because it can get you a Wildwood Lodge as well. So it's not, you're not even doing it just for the kicks. You're doing it because it is getting you powerful cards. So yeah,
exactly, really perfect.
I also came so close, Andy, to finding a Homelands card that was worth playing.
Oh, sure.
It's called Renewal. It's 2 and a green for a sorcery, and you search your library for a basic land card, and then you draw a card at the search your library for a basic land, put it into play, and then you draw a card at the beginning of the next upkeep. So I was like, oh, so Rampant Growth must draw a card. Did I miss the tiny little bit at the top that says you have to sacrifice a land to do so? Yes, I did. Unlucky Homelands, you tried.
Well, you could put this in a deck where every card you play has to have you sacrifice a permanent or has some drawback. People do those like troll decks or griefer decks for themselves. So it's kind of like group slug decks, right, where everyone kind of has to take some kind of damage. But this one's just for you. I know that there are people out there that build those kinds of decks on for a laugh, and this is perfect for one for them.
There's also an interesting thing to say here that it's got a lady in the artwork who's looking right. So if anyone ever makes the ladies looking right deck, then this is the perfect ramp for you.
They're also a redhead as well, so
they are exactly
into a redhead deck. Yeah, there we go.
I did also want to mention quickly Gift of Estates because it's kind of a white version of Cultivate-ish. 1 and a white for a sorcery. If an opponent controls more lands than you, search your library for up to 3 plains cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, and shuffle your library. Similar to land tax, this isn't going to ramp you, but similar to land tax, it doesn't. Unlike land tax, it doesn't say basics. You can get multiple different colors with this. Again, quite cheap. It's only been reprinted in Commander sets. It's quite an old card if you didn't know about it. 2 mana, Gift of Estates. White,
it's only 2 mana.
I know, right? That's the thing that got me. I was like, well, turn 2, you can't really do wrong to set up your turns up to turn 5, turn 6. So very good, especially if you are struggling in that white deck and you want to stay and you still want your ramp in it. You don't want to sacrifice, all of the little nice things that all of the other colours have. This is an option that you have.
Nice. Right,
cool. That's it. That's it for Cultivate and all of the other rampiness.
See how many more ramp cards there are than Cultivate.
I know. That's not even all the ones that I found.
I know. All of them, like very few of them are like permanent based either. They're all instants and sorceries. Cool.
That's what I tried to make sure, and I also wanted them not to sacrifice too much for power because obviously you don't want it just to be officially just a worse card. But there's only so much you can do. Speaking of which, in terms of efficiency, with number 4, we've got Counterspell.
Okay.
Actual counter spell.
Well, see, now this is an interesting one because there's no shortage of blue counter spells, right? So what, before you jump into what your specs are, what kind of did you look at to get alternatives, flavorful alternatives to this card?
So the whole point of me going into this process was, as I said, to try and sacrifice as little power as possible to be something that was more tailored to your deck. As I say, if it can be better than counterspell, a lot of cards won't be unless it's specific circumstances. So I found the ones where those circumstances are more likely. Otherwise, I found ones that do something that's above and beyond what Counterspell does. So the cost difference isn't that much. The opportunity cost isn't too much. Like, yes, Counterspell's 2 mana. Fantastic. but sometimes you don't have 2 islands, so it's not even that great sometimes, you know.
Mm.
So I mean, this is coming from someone who does play efficient counterspells. Now I always get annoyed because I have a playset just sitting here, and I'm like, well, I could play any of these other versions, and thankfully I've only used one of the 4 of them because I have tried to be a bit more you know, interesting and creative in my deck building. But yeah, let's have a look, see, because there are a few different ways you can go with counter spells to kind of flex into your play style.
I will tell you, I have 2 that I'll add in as well, but I'll do so very quickly. I'll do so very quickly at the end. But yeah, no, you go.
All right, so the first one, and I like this one a lot, Admiral's Orders. Admiral's Order. Yeah, 1 blue, counter target spell, so it's essentially cancel, but it's got raid. If you attacked with a creature this turn, you may pay blue rather than pay the spell's mana cost. So it's a single mana, no bars restricted counter spell for 1 mana. The thing I like about this is it's not your normal. So the flavour behind counterspell is very much I'm a douchebag. We've even got a card called "Didn't Say Fucking Please," Andy. I mean, it's not "Didn't Say Fucking Please." That wouldn't be allowed to be printed. But it didn't say please. Like, I mean, come on, can you get any more obnoxious? And counterspell does this. It encapsulates this idea of no, okay, I'm better than you. Whereas this version of blue it's not a rebuttal. It's not, I'm better than thou. It's the fact that the gumption that they have. Damn the cannons, mates! Charge. That's literally the flavor text to the card. And the fact they have this idea, they're so indignant and they're so fervent that you can pay 2 less mana to counter whatever the hell the opponent's doing. It doesn't matter.
Sure. So I mean, this is a slam dunk, Admiral's Order in pirate decks because there are pirate commanders. I mean, Admiral Beckett Brass is the pirate commander, and Beckett Brass is on this card art.
I think it's her saying it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a slam dunk in pirate decks. Anything that has any kind of like nautical or seafaring theme is going to want to use this as well. Little tidbit on Admiral Beckett Brass. This Admiral's Order is the artworks by Slavomir Maniac, but the actual legendary creature card is Jason Rainville, and Jason Rainville based the appearance of Beckett Brass off his own mother. So
nice.
Little tidbit for you there.
Oh, I like that. I like when artists drop in real life into magic.
Yeah.
Right, so the next one, again, we're going to stick with these 1 mana counter spells. I know you might say it's impossible, but oh my god, we're doing it. Abjure, a singular blue. It's counter target spell, but at the additional cost, you have to sacrifice a blue permanent. The reason I put this in is not only does it have really cool, interesting flavor text. The flavor text kind of hints to the Weatherlight saga. I'm not going to read it out because it's quite long and it kind of basically talks about a very specific event. But if you are playing an old school deck, you're realistically probably going to be playing a lot of different colors anyway. And the fact that this hints to like a big part of like the lore, it basically features Miriam Urtai in the card together. Artwork's really cool. Ted Nafer. Like, there's a lot of cards that we're going to be looking at that don't have artists that we see a lot these days because we're looking at artists, that used to be in the old circulation. But a really nice artwork, kind of old school, but still has enough realism to it. The reason I put this in, because I do a lot of this based on kind of my own perspective, because I've got a nice range of decks, so at least I kind of know the different types of deck that might want these kind of cards in. And I play a Breya deck. Now, Breya makes blue tokens, and the ability to be able to sacrifice a Thopter and pay 1 mana to counter any spell is very good. If you're playing Wizard Tribal, if you're playing Blue Token Tribal in any way, shape, or form, this is really strong. And I've not seen this. Again, there are a lot of these cards I put up because I just haven't seen them before. And it's really interesting because, I'm not expecting us to drive the prices of them up or anything, but I mean, it'd be nice to see them to have some more exposure. And it's an interesting thing because it also, the sacrifice is part of the cost. So if for whatever reason you needed to say get a blue spell a blue permanent into your graveyard or whatever, it has that little kind of aspect to it as well. We're going to look at that again in a second, and this idea of being able to do things with your counter spells just beyond countering a spell. But yeah, this idea, it's really nice.
The type line as well describes it as an interrupt rather than an instant as well. So if you're playing old school Magic border or old school like text and wording, like anything before errata, I know there's plenty of people out there that do old school border Magic. This is a perfect one for you.
Yeah,
along with presumably original counterspell.
Yeah, I imagine they were able to make it this strong because interrupts were only able to be played in response to like an instant. So it's so there's this kind of back and forth of where now, because all interrupts are instants, a few of them kind of got a bit stronger. Some cards just don't work. That's how that's just how Magic works. Right, we've got another 1 mana counterspell, Andy, if you can believe it. This is Circular Logic. And I know what you might tell me. Oh, that's 2 in a blue for an instant counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 for each card in your graveyard. True.
Yes.
But it's also got madness for a singular.
Oh, right. You tricksy little minx with your madness.
I know, right? So the thing I like about this is there's an inundation of instant discard effects in Magic. Obviously not just in blue, even though you would have to be in blue to have this, but the ability to be able to discard a card, the amount of looter effects or rummage effects and that kind of thing. And the fact that it's counter target spell, unless you've got you pay 1 for each card in your graveyard, it fits to a graveyard strategies. Realistically, a mana leak is still pretty strong at 1 mana. And it's probably going to be way more than that. It's probably going to be them demanding them to pay 6, 7, 8 or whatever. You're going to be playing this late. You need a little bit of setup. No, it's not turn 2. You can play it out. But also, how often are you playing counterspell on turn 2?
I mean, so rarely.
But yeah, 1 mana. And also, people won't see it coming. It's that whole little thing of what could they possibly have for 1 mana? And you not only get it, but you discard it as well. Like, you're discarding it, you get the effect, and you counter it for 1 mana. Oh, the rubbins. Oh, that's beautiful. Now, that's the side of douchery of counterspells that I can lean into, of where you really have to kind of make it work to get the full effect out of it. So yeah, really nice, really good option. So kind of as we talked about Abjure and this idea of sacrificing things, Familiar's Ruse is a really interesting card. It's blue for an instant. As an additional cost to play it, return a creature you control to its owner's hand, counter target spell. Now, this typically would be a disadvantage, and even though it was out of Lorwyn originally, and a set where you had fairies and merfolk that did things, well, fairies especially, that did a lot of things when they came into play, it's probably almost like an added bonus. But either way I look at this is, because it's an additional cost to play the card, if someone's targeting your thing, whatever it is, with especially a creature or whatever, with a removal spell, you can return it before they even get a chance to have a counter back in turn again. You can cast this as a counter spell to counter the spell, but you're also returning the creature. So even if they've got a counter for your counter spell, the creature's already gone before the counter war can even start.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a nice cheeky way to almost get it out and kind of play the counter spell rules a little bit, interestingly. But the fact that you can do this, and there's another one as well. Deprive, where you return a land instead, which is obviously significantly worse. But if you're playing a landfall deck, it's a lot better. Artwork's amazing, really, really cool artwork. It's got a little like a mana bubble that's exploded like paint. It's coated the elf in paint. It's originally from Rise of the Eldrazi. Really cool cards. There's also Disappearing Actor that does a similar thing for 3 mana, return a permanent. So these ideas of where you can kind of use your counterspell not only as a counterspell, but as a means of resetting a creature or resetting a land, or even bouncing that permanent before they get a chance to respond, it's way more interesting than counter target spellers.
Sure. As far as Familiar's Ruse goes as well, any Merfolk deck will want to be playing this, because the Eric Fortune art for Familiar's Ruse has a Lorwyn Merfolk on the card art. And also any decks which have like Enter the Battlefield Tribal.
Exactly, yeah. Blink decks, things like that, absolutely. Yeah, really cool flavor text on it as well. It's basically, the idea is that fairies can, if you blow magic through fairies, it can kind of kaleidoscope the effect of them, which I think is really interesting. Well, man, Lorwyn had such whimsy. Okay, right, so we're done with like the cheapy kind of counterspells, the ones that can kind of do something cheaply, but you can kind of work around the way to get there. Now we're going to look at Devious Cover-Up. This is a bit more recent. This is from Guilds of Ravnica. 2 blue, counter target spell. If that spell was countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. You may shuffle up to 4 target cards from your graveyard into your library. Now, not only is this a lovely bit of dimmer flavor, which I know you like and I like as well, and a lot of people out there like it because dimmer flavor is gorgeous. This is the first instance we've seen of if the spell is countered this way, exile it instead. One of the big downsides to counterspell from like a mechanical point of view is that the graveyard isn't that difficult to get things back from. And a lot of the cards we see like Dissipate and things like that these days will have the exile clause included, of where instead of going to the graveyard, it's exiled. So there's no shenanigans, no recursion you can get away with. The thing about Devious Cover-Up that's really interesting is, yes, it's twice the cost, but you get to shuffle up 4 cards from your graveyard into your deck again. Now, for decks that like to tutor or like to use, recursion out of the graveyard, or want to reset or want to go really long, there's loads of different things that this can get back into your deck. Really, really cool. It's essentially a redraw of 4 cards, or a way to get cards that you want to protect back into your deck. Because again, the graveyard isn't that difficult to interact with. If your opponent's going to be getting rid of your key spells by exiling them, Devious Cover-Up's a really good way to protect them back into your deck again. This subterfuge aspect of, you don't get your thing, and you don't even get to get my things. Like, I like that a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Very cool.
Yeah, and the flavor text first, dispose of the evidence, then dispose of your knowledge of its disposal. Very nice.
Yeah, if you're playing anything like a Lazav deck, or maybe like an Atrata the Silencer deck, very cool flavor indeed.
Then the last 2 I've got for counterspells are kind of dependent on your deck. These aren't necessarily less flavory, they're more mechanically tied to like your theme. If you're playing a commander that's particularly expensive, something like Dispersal Shields, 1 and a blue, counter target spell. If its converted mana cost is less or equal to the highest converted mana cost among permanents you control. So if you happen to have like, a god deck, for example, like a deck that's not going to have an indestructible thing in play or whatever, like this is a really good way to protect it. It's an easier cost as well. You're not having to go blue. It's just 1 and a blue. It doesn't have to be your commander necessarily, but it does work better with if your commander is more expensive, which typically you want ways to protect them. Expensive commanders don't come back very often if they keep getting killed. So yeah, that's a nice option. Also, Not of This World. Not of This World is a fantastic instant. It's a colorless 7 mana tribal instant Eldrazi card. Counter target spell or ability that targets a permanent you control, and it costs 7 less mana, which will make it free if it targets a creature that you control with power 7 or greater. If again you're playing a deck like Maelstrom Wanderer or something like that, something that has a big old butt, well, not big butt, but a big old front to it, and then yeah, this is a nice free way to protect it. The fact it's a tribal instant as well, you don't get these very often. I think I've mentioned this before. I really like Not of This World. Amazing artwork by Izzy. I think I gush about a lot of this world for a long time. The palette and everything's beautiful. But if you are playing a deck where you have creatures in play that are typically really, really, really big, this is a nice free way to protect them that people might not necessarily see coming.
Yeah. My two that I'm just going to drop in for counterspell, one of them is Stoic Rebuttal. It's one generic blue for an instant that has Metalcraft. Stoic Rebuttal costs 1 less to cast if you control 3 or more artifacts, and it's counter-target spell. So it's literally counterspell, but with the Metalcraft caveat on the front of it. And for my money, as you say, a lot of these you have to work harder to get your counter spells off. But if you're playing a artifact-based deck in blue, which is incredibly easy, I use this in my Bruticlad Telcor Engineer deck, then yeah, it's just another counter spell. And I don't think whenever I've cast this card for the blue cost, I've never cast it for 3. I don't think anyone has ever got that salty at me, but I know plenty of EDH players that if you hard counterspell someone's thing with actual factual counterspell, you'll get a raised eyebrow for some reason. And for some reason, Stoic Rebuttal doesn't fit that bill.
Yeah.
Also has a Vidalcan in the artwork, so if you want to do Vidalcan Tribal, you can do it there. The other one that I'm going to drop in very quickly is Split Decision.
Oh, is this the Will of the Council one?
This is Will of the Council.
Yeah,
so
right.
It's 1 and a blue for an instant. Will of the Council is the ability. Choose target instant or sorcery spell. Starting with you, each player votes for Denial or Duplication. If Denial gets more votes, counter the spell. If Duplication gets more votes or the vote is tied, copy the spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So first off the bat, it only hits instants and sorceries. Okay, so maybe it's more like a negate than a counter spell. But if you're going for flavor, I mean, Will of the Councils, anything that uses voting, anything which you use decks that want to use kind of table interaction or deals or heavy politics. So I run this card in my Atris Oracle of Half Truths deck, which is completely based around. It's kind of it's a group hug deck masquerading as a politics deck, and vice versa.
Did you say masquerading because she's got a mask, and your accidental puns today have been fantastic.
There we go. So Split Decision and Stoic Rebuttal are also my two for the older counterspell alternatives.
I guess we should have also probably mentioned Fueled for the Cause, the one where it proliferates as well, because that's actually kind of important for decks that like Super Friends decks or with Simic decks. Yeah. Basically, there is a lot more interesting things out there. I think most
stop
people
running counterspell in your decks, or run. There are so many different artworks for counterspell. It's not just the kind of blue mage one or the one where it's the red-headed bearded wizard. There are so many artworks for counterspell, and some of them are crazy. So if you are going to run counterspell, make the flavor choice and run an artwork that you really enjoy.
Well, yeah, do what I do and get a playset of white border ones for added salt. Oh, yum, delicious.
The white bordered one's one of my favourite ones.
I really like the white border ones. I like white border cards in general, and that's going to be controversial with lost listeners to that, but it's fine. Whatever, we're moving on. Signets. This is going to be really dull and boring. I mean, the only problem with Signets is they sit at 5th, 7th, 8th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. I'm not going to go through which ones of them they are. Weirdly enough, the one in the last 2 weeks that's most popular is the Boris one, which is one of the ones I thought would be the least popular, even though...
Well, no, it's because Boris doesn't have any other ramp.
I guess as well, also maybe like Zerda and decks like that, people are getting really popular with. Anyway, beyond... interestingly enough, when do you think the first Talisman is?
I don't think it's going to be that high up. I think maybe like 50, 55?
Nah, 68th.
Ah.
Which is crazy low. Mostly because I think that the thing about the Signets is that, yes, they're automatic includes, but I don't think they're as good as the Talismans. I think the idea of being able to get the mana the turn they come in is quite important. But also, the thing about Signets is they kind of automatically have a flavour attributed to them, which means that it makes them automatically very generic.
Sure, they were attributed to the Ravnica guilds very
Exactly.
heavily.
So you might not want your Azorius deck to be attributed towards it. You don't want it might not be a Slesia. I don't care about Slesia, fucking Slesia, stupid Slesia, but it's the only signet you got. Sorry, you're tough titties. So that's one thing that I think marks against it. There are a couple of them out there that are a little more interesting. One of them most people will know is Fellware Stone. This one taps for any color your opponent's lands can produce. In a 4-way game, this often will just tap for 5 colors, but it's really important for decks like, say, I play my Scarab God deck because it steals a lot of cards out of other people's graveyards, but any deck that likes to steal things a lot, you might be seeing things that have activated abilities, so having things like Fellware Stone and Exotic Orchard are really important to have a mana of the opponent's types. Corrupted Graphstone is an interesting one, though. And I know when I first saw it, I knew it wasn't necessarily quote unquote good, but 2 mana, it enters the battlefield tapped. It's an artifact, and you tap it to choose a color of a card in your graveyard and add 1 mana of that color to your mana pool. Now, I like this not only because I like graveyard decks, shock horror, but I also like the fact that it does essentially can tap for it's in 3 or 4 color decks. If you're doing something like, say, Kethis or something where you want to run a load of really intensive mana costs and you want to use your graveyard, this is perfect. It might not be the best because if you get Bajuka Bod, because it doesn't do anything, but it is another 2 mana option, and it is from Innistrad. The Innistrad aesthetic's really nice. I think it's one of those things that obviously if you are playing a graveyard strategy, I think it's no worse than a signet, and sometimes it's better than a signet.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is the only metric I can go by for these, because I've also got one that I think you'll like a little bit, and this is Fractured Power Stone. 2 mana for an artifact, taps for a colorless, or you can tap to roll the planar die. Activates his ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. The thing I like about this is that it mentions the planar die, and it also mentions the Thran. The Thran learn to capture mana, but the power inevitably escapes its bonds. Now, anything that mentions the Thran gives me a little bit of the willies, because we don't even know much about the Thran beyond, Yorgmoth. But beyond that, we don't even know. It's like if Yorgmoth's the only one of the Thran we know, I'd like to know more about them. Anything we get is more interesting, and anything that refers to things like Plains Chase, especially for you and I know is a little bit more enticing.
It's one of our favourite ways to play EDH, that's for sure.
And why would no one play with us?
Because it takes too long.
I know.
People just want to swing with their creatures.
I know. We'll have to do like sponsored Plane Chase nights where it's just one game for 6 hours. So the only other one I've got, because signets, I say there are a few others that people know about, things like Mindstone, and Thought Vessel. People know about these. They aren't that interesting. But Dowsing Dagger is really interesting. 2 mana for an artifact equipment. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 2/0/2 green plant creature tokens with Defender. It has an equip cost of 2. The equipped creature gets +2/+1. When the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you transform Dowsing Dagger. Now, Dowsing Dagger transforms into Lost Veil, which taps for 3 mana of any one colour. So, as much as it isn't a mana rock in of itself, it's kind of better than a mana rock, because it not only has a little nice political gain at the beginning if you give 2 plants off to someone to be nice to them while you smack their friend over the head for 2, but also the fact it permanently turns into a land, much harder to interact with. This idea of exploration, like, what's the flavour of a signet, Andy, really? What do you do? Do you get a bit of red mana and you go, here, have some red mana? It goes, here, have some red and blue mana back. And you go, oh, cool, awesome. Saying that would actually be quite cool if you could just prism energy.
It's the idea that, when a member of the guild sees their signet, then they get imbued with the power of their guild from pride or something. I'm not quite sure.
So I guess the idea is you're tapping into it. So they must have like Power Stone effects-ish. I mean, I'm not saying they're Power Stones by any way, shape, or form, but they must have, magic within them. But yeah, this idea.
Well, I know that the Orzhov signet has a lot of flavour stapled onto it, because if it's tattooed onto someone, then that means that they're a servant of the Orzhov. Whereas if they're held as a pendant, it means they're a master or like an elite in the Orzhov. So there is that dynamic, I know, of Orzhov signet. But some of them are a little bit flaky, it must be said.
Yeah, and I guess once you're looking at like Clue Stones and all of these nonsense, it starts to get a bit more diluted.
Don't get me started on Clue Stones.
Yeah, whereas Dowsing Dagger is fantastic. We're going to go and have a search for some lands, and we find you had to hack down some plants to get there. And once you get through the plants, you find the Lost Veil. The flavour to all of the... I love flip cards. I mean, we've done to death on transform cards, but we could probably do more. I love the Ixalan flip cards a lot. But this is a really nice, random 2 mana artifact that does ramp you, that you wouldn't necessarily see. If you do play an equipment deck, or you play a deck with a low commander cost, then yeah, this is a really good option.
Sure.
So we're finally getting towards cards that actually have some favour to kind of pick apart a little bit. I know that sounds kind of like pushing everything we've said before aside a little bit, but this is where I started getting towards cards that I was like, oh, okay, finally we're not looking at like, I'm not going to say the word staples because this Cyclonic Rift is a staple, but Cyclonic Rift is a style of card that you can do a lot of different kind of, you can look at a varying different types of it without it just being, this is also a mana rock and this is also a counter spell. So Cyclonic Rift obviously is known for being super, super, super salty. The thing about it I like is because it's so ubiquitous, you don't feel too bad about replacing it with something worse. You might not necessarily go and buy another one, not only because it costs another £30, but you're like, do I want another Cyc Rift and another deck?
It's just being reprinted in double masters.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of things.
That's going to date this video.
There's going to be a lot of things that are in double masters though that are really interesting in terms of reprints. I think that they've done a good job of providing another option for people to get things, even if the price is still redunculously hefty. So I think the obvious one that people will know about, obviously Command Game Nights did this, or had this card featured quite prominently in one of their games, was River's Rebuke. 4 blue, return sorcery, which is important. 4 blue for a sorcery, return all non-land permanents target player controls to their owner's hands. Now, this is mean, but the reason I like this is because it's an anti-Cyclonic Rift. Instead of it being like, screw everyone else's stuff apart from me, you go, no, screw this one person individually. Like this this one person specifically. And the reason I like that is not only do you have Ixalan being shown, and again, I don't know what it is about Ixalan, but I loved the Merfolk theme to them. Very interesting the way that they...
Well, again, Merfolk is quite a lauded tribe, and in Ixalan we got quite a few good Merfolk commanders.
Yeah,
so...
and their aesthetic was great. Yeah, very cool cards. Yeah, I mean, I also think that, like, looking back even at the OG Evacuation, there's something quite... I like the kind of feeling of where you suck the entire battlefield up. And the thing about Evacuation is one of the artwork has, like, these hands that kind of scooping all of these play pieces back up into the ether. Now, that's a really, really cool idea. Like, I think flavorfully-wise, Cyclonic Rift has never really felt... Yes, it's a lightning tornado, I get it. But it doesn't feel very mystical, you know? It feels more... I don't know. I don't know something
it feels more
about
elemental. It feels more visceral. Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know, something about the wizardry side of Evacuation that kind of makes me feel a little bit. I mean, I do understand, and we are going to be looking at a lot more kind of weathery based ones. And like the next one is a prime example: Crush of Tentacles. Crush of Tentacles, 4 blue for a sorcery, and again, the big caveat for these is a lot of them aren't going to be instant. That part of what makes the Cyclonic Rift and a staple is that nothing else quite does what it does. 7 mana, end of turn, boom, I win the next turn. Fantastic, beautiful. These don't do that as much. That's probably a good thing because there is a less amount of salt that kind of comes your way. You might not piss everyone off as much, but that doesn't mean they're going to always serve the same function or to be able to do the same kind of thing that it does. That, Crush of Tentacles does give you a bit of an advantage. It's a 4 blue sorcery. Return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. But if you pay it for its surge cost, which is 3 blue, you may cast it for the surge cost if your teammate, well, it would be yourself, if you've cast another spell this turn. And if you have played it for its surge cost, you get an 8/8 blue octopus creature token onto the battlefield after everything's already been sucked up. So it kind of gives you an opportunity to, again, kind of like River's Rebuke, if there is one person that's really ahead, you've not only reset the battlefield, but you also get to keep smacking them now with an 8/8, which will probably kill them pretty quickly if they don't do something about it. So that's a nice idea of like, it's not quite, I've got everything, none of you have anything. It's that, well, no one really has anything except I've got an octopus.
Any decks that are playing sort of sea creatures, like, so Thassa decks are very popular for this idea that people want to play, big sea creatures, Krakens, octopus, all that kind of thing. Sometimes people play Kiora, any of the Kiora planeswalkers as their commander, even if it's not Oathbreaker or something like that, because they want to be playing these sea creature decks. This one, Crush of Tentacles, is definitely better for those kinds of aesthetics than anything like Cyclonic Rift.
Similar fashion, obviously, most people know Whelming Wave. It's the one that bounces every non-Leviathan, Kraken, Serpent, Sea God, Creature, whatever thing, fish. It's that one. There's also, however, Engulf the Shore. 3 and a blue for an instant. So this is nice and cheap. We're getting towards territory that's quite nice and cheap. Return to their owner's hands all creatures with toughness less or equal to the number of islands you control. Now, this similarly would play in the similar kind of decks of big sea creatures. If you've got like a Nazahul deck or something like that, you will basically be resetting the entire board. This is only of creatures, so again, like it's not exactly the same kind of thing. But this idea of being able to reset the whole board whilst leaving all of your big sea monsters behind is very flavourful. The artwork by Cliff Childs is it's got this kraken in the waves that's coming over the top of this lighthouse, and you've got all the tentacles in the background. It looks almost like Marit Large. It's great, fantastic.
If you're playing something like a Voltron deck, you only really want to get rid of people's creatures, right?
Precisely, exactly. If you're playing Mono Blue Voltron as well, then that's also super niche. And the fact that this fits in, even it's almost like this card was like tailor made for it. If you play like something like Bruner or something like that, even kind of in the similar vein of like sea kind of things. This is back at another Merfolk one. This is from Eventide. This is Inundate. 3 blue for a sorcery. Return all non-blue creatures to their owner's hands. This is similar to like say Mass Calcify, which is like all non-white creatures are destroyed, and you play it and you can kind of get a massive advantage off of it. But this is quite nice again to see the Merfolk, but a very different kind of Merfolk. If you're like playing something like Sieg with River Guide, or any of the other kind of like more Lorwyn-y kind of Merfolks, which do look very different to Ixalani.
They look more like classic Mero than
exactly. They don't have legs. They look a little bit more cutthroat. Obviously, Sieg is literally a river cutthroat.
He is when he's Lorwyn guy,
exactly.
Shadowmoor guy,
So for years, a landfolk have emptied their refuse into the waters. It's time to return the favour. So if you want to play a recycling deck or like an environmental friendly deck, this is perfect for you. This is literally a merfolk chucking their rubbish back at them. Beautiful, love it. I think the only other one I've got, and this is an interesting one because it's not an instant or sorcery, is Kederic Leviathan. 6 blue for a creature Leviathan 5/5. When it enters the battlefield, return all other non-land permanents to their owner's hands. And it has Unearth for 6 and a blue. Good God, this is a chunky boy. I played this originally, I think, in... I tried to play it in Tulane before I, trimmed it down to some obnoxious thing. But I've done it in a few other decks which like to have graveyard shenanigans and mill shenanigans, because the thing about an 8 mana 5/5 that bounces everything and leaves itself behind is quite good. The fact that if you kill it and then everyone kind of might forget about it a little bit. Most people don't know about the Unearth, and then suddenly out of nowhere you go, 7 mana, I'm just going to do it again after everyone's set up the turn after. Oh my God, it's annoying. And also I like a lot of these cards all kind of do that big sea creature kind of flavor theme. Even though saying that Kederic Leviathan has more lightning in the back of its artwork than I think it has any right in doing so. That does not make any amount of meteorological sense. But who's calling out weather in Grixis apparently, But anyway, so it's a creature option if you wanted to, again, like you wanted one of your sea creatures to be able to, if you didn't want to say play instants or sorceries, whatever, if you wanted a dude that you can search up to have the same effects, does the same kind of thing. Again, I just like this idea of this fuck off enormous thing just breaching the surface, washing everything away, dying, and then it just coming back again as a zombie. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, very cool.
But as again, Cyclonic Rift's a difficult one because again, it fits a certain niche. The fact it's also modal just pushes it over the top. The fact you could just 2 mana just do it to one thing is just so obnoxious. And it feels even there's even something worse about someone going, hey, you know what's worth me using 2 mana of a Cyclonic Rift on? Douching your one specific thing over. I don't know how that feels worse than them overloading it, but somehow it does. So play these ones. Don't make people feel like you're being as much of a douchebag anymore. If that's your concern.
Okay, moving on.
We've got Beast Within.
Beast Within. Nice.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. This breaks the game. I can't do this one. Like, how do you do flavor alternatives to a card that literally breaks the color pie and doesn't have very many? Like, there's so few things that do anything even close to Beast within green. The few that I could find were things like Desert Twister, which is a 6 mana sorcery version that doesn't give them a 3/3. It's expensive. I mean, one thing I will say with a caveat, and I'm going to say this about a couple of cards in a second as well, is that green has an ability to make mana more than any other color. So the fact it's 6 mana isn't quite as backbreaking. The fact it's 6 mana and a sorcery kind of is. The thing I'm going to look at after that is a Scour from Existence, 7 mana, colorless, instant, exile target, permanent. Nice and simple. You would think, but that's way more expensive than Beast Within. How is that close to being the same thing? It's like, well, realistically, green can make a ton of mana, and if you are playing big Eldrazi, which you will likely be doing in a green deck, like I have, then you want something that's going to feel what your removal spells to feel Eldrazi-like. And if green's not going to offer you very many removal beyond Beast Within, which is kind of weird flavor-wise from an Eldrazi point of view, because that's not really what they do. Whereas Scour from Existence, oh, hell yeah, that's the kind of thing the Eldrazi do. You've also got Spine of Ishtar. The reason I put this in is because, again, 7 mana, you're in green, super easy to get out, destroys things very easily and comfortably. And also you're probably playing green, which means you could probably destroy artifacts pretty easily, get a cycle effect back into your hand. No one expects the green deck to cycle Spina Vista rather than say like the Doretti deck. So yeah, these are two
Well, yeah,
options
but
that
you
I
have
think.
commanders like Gliss of the Traitor. Gliss of the Traitor would be a perfect one for something like Spina Shah. So yeah, you wouldn't necessarily want Beast Within. Spina Shah is going to fit your flavor a lot better.
Yeah, so the only other one, the other one that I could think was like really nice and flavorful is Root Grapple. Now, Root Grapple is a tribal instant tree folk. Shockingly, a lot of the ones that we've seen for like instants and sorceries that are more flavorful are tribal. This is part of the reason I think it's a shame we might not see it back. Is because I do feel like it layers on a certain aesthetic to effects that we wouldn't otherwise see. It's 4 red a green to destroy target non-creature permanent. If you control a tree folk, draw a card. Now, obviously, if you're playing something like Doran, or if you're playing the Sapling of Kolfana or something like that, any tree folk commander, if you happen to be, or if you're playing a tree folk heavy themed deck, you're playing Arcades Walls or anything like that, the extra draw card is fantastic. The ability to be able to search it out, because there are a few cards that obviously can search out their own tribes, and there are a few things like Tree Folk Harbinger that will be able to get this out. The fact it's an instant, no, it doesn't hit creatures, but green can kind of handle creatures okay. So the fact that it can kind of get around that, I mean, there are other effects within green that do this, of where they could just destroy any old thing as long as it's not a creature. But I mean, in terms of flavorful things, if you're playing tree folks, you probably don't care about dudes, because dudes are just going to hit your big butts and not really care, like, you know. So you probably only really care about the fact that it's hitting non-creatures, and at that point, it seems like a slam dunk.
Yeah, for sure.
Then they start to get a bit more interesting. Chain of Acid is a really interesting one. 3 and a green for a sorcery. Destroy target non-creature permanent. Then that permanent's controller may copy this spell and may choose a new target for that copy. Now, all I've written after this is, let's go! Because in a 4-way game, if there's a bunch of stuff on the battlefield that a bunch of people don't like, and or you're having a really ratty game and everyone's really getting each other, you put down a Chain of Acid and you just watch the fun. Because you go, right, I'm going to kill that thing. And they go, right, fine, well, I'm going to kill that thing. And you go, right, fine, well, I'm going to go and kill your thing. And they go, well, I'm going to go and kill that guy's thing. And he's going, well, I don't want anyone else to have this, so he's going to kill that. Ah, beautiful. Now, that might not necessarily be a flavorful thing. The art by Ron Spencer, by the way, is amazing. I don't know what the hell's going on it. There's some weird lightning elemental thing going on between two elves and a goblin in Ron Spencer's amazing way of doing goblins with their bloodshot eyes. It might not be the most flavorful, but you tell me the flavor of Beast Within and tell me Chain of Acid doesn't kind of have a similar aesthetic.
Well, I think also it's not just the aesthetic of the artwork. Anything, again, this might as well be something like Will of the Councils or, Council's Judgment. It's that similar kind of votey, everyone gets involved aspect. So any commanders, for example, that are in green that have that thing. So Kethis, the Hidden Hand, is one which his whole character breakdown is that he pulls the strings and he's the kind of puppet master politically behind the goings on around him. So this is very much you role playing that idea. It's you destroying someone else's thing and then watching all the dominoes fall with everyone else starting to eat each other. So I think this is a very good one. I mean, it's a little bit steep at 4 mana, but again, none of these are there for their like efficient mana costs.
No, exactly. And the fact that it can kill it could kill everything on the board if you had the right setup. It's kind of like Massacre Girl. Like, in the right circumstances, could do a lot of work. The only other one I've got for Beast Within, because it is such a weird niche to kind of find analogs for, is Song of the Dryads. Now, this feels way more in keeping with Green's flavour and way of dealing with things. Beast Within, I kind of understand this idea. I mean, looking at something like, say, Rapid Hybridization or Pongify, like that idea of transmorphication, like that I understand the process of, but I don't think it works within Green's Colour Pie, which is kind of what Beast Within is showing. You're reverting to your primal nature. I get that. But Song of the Dryad seems way more likely. It's 2 and a green for an enchantment aura. Enchant permanent. Enchanted permanent is a colourless forest land. This idea of the person being claimed by the forest. I mean, the flavour text is prime for this. Few who encounter the strange, human-like grove leave once the lilting chorus of the Dryads reaches their ears. And this idea of being like these wood sirens, this idea of going to the forest, falling asleep under the wrong tree and never waking up again, is something that is apparent in a lot of like fairy tales within English or British or even European folklore. But this just feels, I don't know, the aesthetic of this feels so much more green than Beast Within does to me.
It's very similar to Lingify as well.
Yeah, exactly. Lignify, that's only affects creatures, turns them into a 0/4 defender. That's another tribal instant. Shockingly, Nathan likes tribal instant. Tribal card. It's a tribal enchantment. But yeah, I think the funny thing about this card, though, is that I have it whenever I give this deck to players as I'm teaching them how to play, they never look at it as a removal spell. They always look at it as a way to give themselves another land. which you can do, obviously, if you are super, super desperate. You can always, chuck it on a random token, and you can turn your token into a forest or whatever. But it is an interesting theory where it doesn't feel necessarily like a removal spell flavor-wise, but when you realize how strong it is as a flavor, as a removal spell, that's why I think it feels more green. So I think, yeah, if you're going for flavor-wise and you want to feel more, close to your inner nature, don't go for Beast Within. Go for Song of the Dryads. So now next we've got Steve. Good old Steve. For those that don't know, Steve is Sakura Tribe Elder.
Sure.
And now he is the staplest of staples. I've also only just realised as we've got to Steve, it's like a lot of these are green. Shockingly, obviously, green is the most popular colour in Commander, but obviously then the cards that are in green are going to be more staples. So I mean, I guess this is an interesting way to look at the most popular colours, most popular effects, and find the least popular versions of those popular effects, if you know what I mean. Steve being a really difficult one, because Steve is the tried and tested, proven best boy around. However, he's just because he's super efficient and he is the best at doing what he's doing doesn't mean he's the only one who does it or is the only one who can do it efficiently.
And also, let's be real. He's a snake person. Do you know what I mean? Like there are how many decks other than Snake Tribal want snake creatures? If you want to go for a tribal deck, or if you want to go for a very specific aesthetic, unfortunately, Sakura Tribe Elder, either the promo art, which is now not so much promo, or the original art, just doesn't really cut it.
I don't like either of them. To be fair, I'm not a big fan of either.
I don't mind either of them. It's very much that card.
Yeah.
Whereas
I prefer Yavimaya Elder's artwork way more than Sakura Tribe Elder, for example, because it's just like, oh, he's got a weird druidy thing, and he's got a wolf and a bird and stuff in his hair. Like, that seems way more interesting than Snake Boy, old Snake Boy.
Old Snake Boy.
So the easiest one I had to find, and this is this I know said strict upgrades and downgrades don't really exist, but this is kind of both. Dawn Treader Elk, 1 and a green. It's a 2/2 creature elk. Pay 1 mana, sacrifice Dawn Treader Elk to search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So the same kind of thing that Sakura Tribe Elder does, except for a 2/2, not a 1/1. You have to pay a mana instead of it being free. Now the reason I bring this up is because not only is an elk way more typical of a forest, but it's John Avon artwork, and it is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
So as you were saying about the artwork of Sakura Tribe, if you're sick and tired of looking at Steve, looking at you, looking at him, looking at you, get Dawn Treader Elk. The reason I say this, well, I might change it over from Diligent Farmhand, which is another option we'll talk about in a second, because I've got one in Merrin. I think just looking at the artwork, I think Dawn Treader Elk is really, really, really pretty. If you're doing the woodland critter kind of theme, it fits it much nicer. If you're doing even like a new Kenrith, even a hunting party decks. I mean, there are loads of little like flavor niche decks that this can fit into significantly better than Old Snake Boy. The most interesting one I could find for Sakura Tribe Elder was Avenging Druid. It's a little bit different, but you'll kind of see why I think it's good in a second. It's 2 and a green for a 1/3. When it deals damage to any opponent, you may reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a land card. You put that land into play and put all other revealed cards into your graveyard. Now, is it the same mana cost? No. Does it sacrifice itself to be able to get yourself a land at instant speed? No. Does it have to be engaged in combat to get you a land? Yeah. But does it get you any land? Yes. Does it come into play untapped? Yes. And does all of the other cards, when you're probably wanting your dude in the graveyard anyway, do they all go into the graveyard as well? Yes, they do. Yum, yum, yum. This card is... Have I never seen this card before? It's crazy. I mean, I know it's from
Old Border as well.
Yeah, Darren Bader. Yeah, Darren Bader. Really, really cool artwork. Really nuanced. And it does a lot of things. Like, imagine playing this in, like, say, a Muldrotha deck. You end up flipping over, like, 6 or 7 cards before you hit any lands. Like, it's kind of like Hermit Druids a little bit. Like,
and as a 1/3 as well, seeing as it's a 1/3, it fetch decks like Doran the Siege Tower or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's Druid as well, could get Druid decks very easily. The fact it can get into any... It does something that green doesn't normally... You don't really see these kinds of effects, and this is the only type of this effect I've ever seen. And because of that, there will be a place for it to go. Like, Sakura Tribe Elder is the same as any other thing, but there are loads of other ones that are worse, so that's why Sakura Tribe Elder is the best option. With a card like this, no, it's not Sakura Tribe Elder by any stretch of the imagination, but nothing else is like this.
Any deck which Sakura Tribe Elder super excels, like Reanimator decks or like Graveyard Strategies or Sacrifice effects, Avenging Druid's going to be good in that deck as well, right? Like... Yeah.
I mean, obviously they're going to serve ever so slightly different functions, but again, like, you're doing all the same things. It's all lands, graveyards. I mean, there are ways to make this better, even if it is on a, the floor is technically what, quote unquote worse. So yeah, that's a really good example. Another one that I think is really nice, Veteran Explorer. It's a single green for a creature, human, soldier, scout. It's got the trifecta in there. When it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, each player may search their library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield. Then each player search their library, shuffles it, and it's a 1/1. Now, yes, okay, I get that giving your opponent's lands isn't necessarily that good, but I've played this in decks like Maelstrom Wanderer to great effect. The fact it gets 2 basic land cards into play untapped is fantastic. The fact it's a human, a soldier, and a scout, in case you are doing Scout Tribal. If you are doing Scout Tribal, you play this card because there are maybe like 8 of them. But, like, the fact it's got a triple creature type is amazing. David A. Cherry's artwork is the original. It's actually, weirdly enough, seen the 3 different iterations of border. It's got like the old school border, the newish school border, like around like 2010 time, and then it has a reprinting with the black bit at the bottom that came back in.
Sure,
as well as having
the most recent one is from Battle Bond, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's got
and then you've got the new artwork version. So you've actually got a full playset you could do with each one being different, if you, for whatever reason, wanted to. But yeah, it's really nice, really cool artwork, really cool effect. Again, slightly different. The reason I like this as well, though, is because Scourge Tribe can't satisfy a sacrifice ability and getting a land. I thought about this about Viridian Emissary as well, which is 1 and a green for a 2/1 of when it dies, you search your library for a basic land, put it into play tapped. With a deck that wants your creatures to be dying, it might want to be causing them to die and then getting the effect, so you get multiple effects, rather than Secure Tribe Elder that it can only sacrifice itself for a land or be sacrificed for whatever other effect. So it might be that you really want things like, it's not that you don't care about the death trigger, you care about sacrificing it to another card, say like Ashnod's Altar or something like that. And you will not only get the mana from the Ashnod's Altar, but you'll also be getting the mana from the Viridian Emissary or from the Veteran Explorer.
Well, I mean, I think also Sakura Tribe Elder. So, I mean, obviously, it couldn't fit into a Taser Karlov deck because Taser Karlov's black white. But if Taser Karlov is in a deck that also has green in it, because there are Abzan, Death Matters decks, the death trigger will double up. Whereas Sakura Tribe Elder is the sacrifice is part of the cost. So things like that won't double up, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it all depends on your tailored needs, and these are maybe some of the times when you might think, "Oh, I wish my Sakura Tribe just did this other thing." And you've actually got you've got options out there. There are other ways to take advantage and flex a little bit. Yes, these are the most efficient things, but also you've got to think that these are also the most obvious. If someone's just flashing a deck together, they're going to instantly go, right, what do I need? I need some ramp spells. So, okay, right, chuck a Kadama's Reach, chuck a Cultivate. You obviously probably put Rampant Growth in. And before they've even thought about it, because they're just doing, throwing a random deck up. Because this EDH Rec does take a lot of decks in that are people's whims. They're just little things they throw out there every now and again. They're not doing it to be attuned or a tailored deck necessarily. So there is a pinch of, there's a pinch of salt to be taken with this. And it is, there is a shame that a lot of the cards do fall into being ramp cards. But as I say, as we do more of these, we will get into more interesting, more nuanced cards that will take me much longer to find the more interesting versions of.
Sure.
But yeah, as a drive-by, I mean, obviously ramp is good and counterspells are good and stuff, but I mean, doesn't stop you from being adventurous.
Yeah, sure. And it definitely doesn't stop people from building decks, again, as we said earlier, that don't work, quote unquote. Like, do push your boundaries when you're building a like EDH deck. A good way to do it is to build a deck how you would build it, like with all the most sort of staple best cards. So put your counter spells in, put your rampant growths in, whatever else, and then just go through every card. And if you want to scale back your power, or if you want to, bend it to be a werewolf tribal deck, or like a sea monsters tribal, or everyone in the deck's wearing a hat, or whatever the hell you're doing, you can go through each card and just go on together, or use this resource or whatever else, or Scryfall, and just see what the alternatives are. And if the card still does the same thing, but it's more of a mana cost, or there are more hoops to jump through, it still does the same thing, and your deck will function.
Exactly.
just pick the right table to sit down at. Don't sit down against someone who's playing a Narset deck or a Zerdi in charge of Doomsday deck. Just pick your tables.
And the process for this wasn't actually too bad. Like, it was actually, all it was either I went onto Scryfall, put the same words in, whether, like, obviously for counter spell, just put counter target spell into the Oracle, and it brought me up all of them. But even if things like return and hands, you can put like little key signifiers like that. Otherwise, I also went on for a couple of things and went, what are other people using for this? And saw what people said. And obviously people had a list of all of their alternatives, their quirky cards, their I know better than you kind of advice, which sometimes is very good. So these resources are out there to help you diversify. So don't feel like it's too scary to stray from the path if you get a precon deck and you're like, I don't know what to do with it. Just, it's fine. It's all a process. It's all a process.
Exactly. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us for this installment of Flavourful Alternatives to Commander Staples. As Nathan said, we will be doing more of these in the future where we will be covering all sorts of different cards. And our kind of tastes may change as well. So today we did a very heavy, like, mechanical alternatives thing, because that's kind of where we're going and picking out flavour
Plus,
slots.
staples are really hard to not.
Staples are hard,
to.
right?
Yeah.
But sometimes you might tune into these and we might be talking almost exclusively about different arts you can use, or whether if you're trying to go for a certain aesthetic, you can do like which way or another. If you are listening to this as the audio version of the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, do check out our YouTube channel, Magic the Flavouring, where we're posting up Cracker Pack videos, we're converting our interview videos, and we'll be putting up episodes like this into video form. So if you want to re-listen to this and also have the visuals, go check it out. If you are watching this on YouTube now, don't forget to hit that like button, share this with your friends as well, and subscriptions are always welcome, so hit that sub button.
Oh God, we're all multimedia now, aren't we?
We're all multimedia, mate. Yeah, we've got more stuff going on.
I was like, oh shit, man, yeah, of course, this is YouTube now. Wow.
If you want to hit us up on Twitter, guys, where we do daily Twitter discussions and engage with the larger Magic community on that social media channel, you can hit us up at mtflavouring. My personal Twitter is at Andy Manface. Nathan's, yours is
at the Fox in the Moon.
Emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. Nathan, do you have any final words for this episode?
No, thank you for listening to us rattle through a lot of cards very quickly. I know we do have a habit of doing that sometimes. But otherwise, all good. Happy
Fantastic.
days, live well.
All right, guys. Well, the last word that I'll say is that whilst we've been doing lots of staple cards, basic lands are also very important. So always remember as well to look after your basic lands, because they'll love you back too. Other than that, guys, thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.